I'm Daniel. I'm a product designer at Mews, and I'm in part of the POS team, which takes care of food and beverage of a property. And I'm here today to talk about some prototyping experiments, I would call, that I've been conducting at Mews. So first and foremost, I'll be switching screens. It's not only Figma slides. I'll go to the browser, other Figma tabs, so might get messy. Hope not. So first and foremost, I'm gonna start with Figma 2v0 or Vercel with menu builder. So we have been working on building a custom menu builder, so for restaurants, where they can just build any sort of menu. So that we did on Figma 2v0, and then we'll go to a full Figma prototype for self-checkout, so splitting bills, paying bills at a restaurant. So creating menus. So this is a sample of the prototype or the static designs we created on Figma. So here you see kind of an idea of where the concept was heading. So we have a menu builder on 3 steps. We have menu sections, and then we have a side panel with a bunch of products that can be dragged into a menu section. And that's sort of the behavior for creating these menus. So of course, there's a big component here, which is the dragging behavior. So you need to drag components or drag items into a section. So there's a lot of dragging and dropping. So based on that, I wanted to explore the actual behavior and possibilities of the drag and drop. For me to do this testing, I needed a more programmatic approach, so I can also get closer to users and actually feel how this solution would feel for users, and to engineers, so just facilitate communication with engineers. Again, this started on Figma, just the regular process, flushing out the entire flow, thinking about potential edge cases, corner cases. So here we have in this example the first step, which is just passing menu details, then selecting outlets where these menus would exist, and then just building the menu and finally saving the menu. So all of this was made in Figma. And then we'll jump into V0. So this is the V0 example. So it's quite rough. It's using Tailwind for the UI. Tailwind's kind of a new bootstrap, a little bit nicer perhaps. So I'll just walk you through what we can do with V0 from Figma to V0, and then I'll show you a little bit of how I went about it. I'm sure there's many ways, and maybe you have explored yourself. So here I'll start by creating my menu. Maybe you cannot see the contrast is low, but I can pass here a menu name and a description. What I also found interesting here is that you can, right away, you could set up different parameters for validation. So if you wanted a parameter to be required, you can do so very easily on V0, so you can now go to the next step without passing certain information. So as you saw on Figma, we have the 3 steps, menu name, the outlets, the products, and the parameters. Rather simple. Simple in the design. So we're in the second step. We can select our outlets where this menu would live. And then we have our menu builder, so the 3rd step, where we defined the products that go into a section, into a menu section here at the left side. So we have this left side with menu sections and the right side with some products. So here's where we could experiment with the drag and drop behavior. What was interesting is that once I talked to our engineers, they let me know that we were going to use the D&D kit, which is a library for drag and drop, and it looks sort of like this. So this is D&D kit. And here you have the library that we're using in the team for dragging and dropping items. So I use this as a reference to guide the implementation on V0, and also to tell V0 to implement the D&D kit as opposed to other drag and drop libraries. This way I could actually test and see what define the different states. So let's add some products. As you can see, I can add multiple products or select multiple products, and I can drag them. Once I drag on these products, I see this dragging state that tells me that I'm adding 3 products and the drop zone here being highlighted. So all of this behavior is coming from the D&D kit library, and this allowed me to identify the different states of the dragging behavior. So we have on drag behavior, which is what we're doing now. And then we have the drop behavior where we drop the item, and what happens then on the product list. So these items can only be added once. So that's good. Then I can add one at a time, and then the on drag behavior changes. Then I'm not showing the quantity of items I'm dragging. I just show the exact item I'm dragging, and I can drop it as well. So you can see there's this glitchy. It doesn't work perfectly. You need to kind of fine tune it, but it's good enough to go out to a user and test it. So when we talk to users, they told us, hey, like I have really extensive menus. I cannot just be dragging and dropping items one by one. So that's when we came up with different solutions for executing this. So you can select multiple with no drag. Drag is not necessarily the most user-friendly movement to do with the hand on a trackpad or a mouse. So you can just add as normal. So this is overall the concept of how you build a menu. Then of course you can save it and you're done. And then you have kind of like this menu list or menu landing page where you can delete and start all over. So how did we get there? We got there very easily. So first, as I mentioned, we design on Figma, everything just as we're all familiar with. And then I just went into V0 and I asked to create a restaurant menu manager, pretty much, and described the steps. So I want one step to define the menu, then I want a second step, and a third step to add products. So right away, V0 starts creating for you, starts installing certain libraries through the npm install, like React Beautiful. Then it's just an ongoing conversation. You've probably been here before with ChatGPT and all of the like. The only thing that I found, or one of the things, because there's a lot of interesting things, or maybe I'm geeking out, but for me, what was really interesting is that at this point, I could, one, get all the code and just talk over the code. I don't know how to code myself. I just know how to spend time on a computer and ask questions. So what I found really interesting is that you can actually give it screenshots. So I would send these screenshots from Figma to V0 and tell them, hey, I want the UI to look like this, or I want certain button to have certain aspect. And you would see, okay, I'm going to fix the width of the panel, the side panel. And that's how a lot of the iteration went that I went with V0. Then in this case, for example, it wasn't understanding when I said side panel, it didn't understand what I was saying. So I would highlight the component in Figma, screenshot of that, and then due to the highlight, it would understand, okay, I'm making reference to this highlighted section. This went X amount of iterations. I spent a lot of time on this. And after some time, they brought up the Figma functionality to V0. So you can actually import from Figma. You just enter a URL and you go from Figma to V0. So this is really nice. I haven't played that much with it myself so far, but that was nice. I did find some difficulties along the way. It took me a couple hours to solve, and that was regarding the behavior of the library itself, of the drag and drop library. So just the terminology, defining the drop zones, the rejection of a dropped item, all this terminology that I wasn't familiar with, I needed to research in the D&D kit documentation so that I could speak to V0. So that was interesting, and that's how we ended up with a menu manager that, again, you can just share the link and it can be tested and you can get immediate feedback right away without having to moderate the user testing session. So that's the first topic I wanted to share. So that was Figma to V0. And now I wanted to share the Express Checkout project, which is another exploration of prototyping, but this time on Figma. So I was working at Mews on a tipping flow that was part of a payment flow. This payment flow was took place when you, I guess, ask for a bill at a restaurant, and it's time to pay. So when that time to pay happened, there was tipping screens and so on. I was out in a restaurant with some friends, and I asked for the bill to be split. And one of my friends told me, "This is as a waiter, this is really awkward for you to be asking to split the bill by consumption." And herself was a waiter at some point. She told me, "Well, I would do it if I liked the person." So I started thinking, well, this is a really complex issue. Like, this could impact how much I tip, or if I tip or don't tip. And it was just an awkward situation as a guest and as a waiter. So I challenged myself to kind of solve this issue and bring her a solution, just to gather her feedback, since she had experienced it herself as a waiter. She had no experience with Figma prototypes. She has no clue about this. She's kind of like this punk rocky alternative waiter in Barcelona. So the first scenario, which is where my experience initiated, was in the traditional way of waiter manually splitting the bill. If they liked you enough, they'll split the bill for you. It was awkward. You have to tip in the POS, in the POS right there on. It was really awkward. So the ideal state is a self-serve state where guests can just split the bill how they want, pay instantly, tip or not tip, and all be personal. So to make this work, I needed a prototype that was dynamic, configurable, and interactive. Remember, this person had no clue of any of this technology. I just wanted to put on her hand a prototype and get her feedback. So I needed to make this work without explaining. So this is a video of how it worked, or the prototype, and then we'll dive deeper into the setup. So the idea is that you get the bill printed, has a QR code. You scan your QR code of the bill. You go into the bill. So here you have this restaurant. This is the bill of that table, and here you have all the items ordered and your total bill here. So I can continue to payment, pay the bill myself for the full amount, or I can split the bill. So I want to split the bill. There's two ways of splitting the bill in this concept. One is by consumption, and the other one is evenly. But I think the interesting one is for prototype's sake, the consumption one. So I'll continue. And here I'm back again to the list of items that were ordered, and I can add as many items as I want. I can subtract, I can add more, and so on. So here what's interesting is the dynamic values of the content. So we have those numbers, the item counts here, moving up and down, and then we have the dynamic price updating as well. You might find yourself before, like at some points when you test a prototype and you have to kind of explain the person that's using it, like, oh, don't worry, it's a prototype. This might not work correctly. It's glitchy because it's just a prototype. So I didn't want to have that interaction. I just wanted, because this person didn't know anything about this, so I just wanted to work smoothly. So again, like, I can just delete as many and I'll see everything updating. So if I go to pay my bill, I can tip. And here I see the amount that I was selected in the previous screen. And I also see the percentages correctly calculated. So I see 10, 8, and 5% of the total bill that is accurately calculated. So I can add, and I can subtract, I can add another one. And I have all this dynamic values here. Same here. In this case, we have a subtotal, a tip amount, a tax, and a total amount. And it's not, I think it's nothing new for us. Like, this is just a regular checkout. But for sakes of the prototype, what was interesting to me was working with dynamic values, dynamic data, variables, and conditionals. So that's what we're going to see now. So go back to our presentation. I think it all starts with thinking about the behaviors to prepare the actual file. So thinking very closely of what you want to create and how you want it to behave. If we go back to this screen, we see here that we have a plus button. And when we click that button or tap that button, I want to show an item count. So I want to add 1 to the item count. And then I also want to show a remove button once I click that add. Once I add an item or 2, I want to multiply the price of this item by the amount, the item count. And then I want to update the total bill. And I want to save that value so I can then pay for it. So this is very obvious behavior, but for the sake of prototyping, we need to account for each one of them to know what we're going to set as variable content and what is static content. So this is how I think about the behaviors of the UI to prepare the file. And for me, it was one of what made it easier to understand how to set up then all the variables and all the a little bit more complex features in Figma. So as you saw, it's all components, very basic components. We have a repetition of components on the bill, and we'll see those now. So here we have the item, the product, that we can call it a products list. So we have this item here, which is just repeated across the UI. And then we have that footer, and the footer has a CTA with the bill. So we'll focus on those 2 components for now because everything else is kind of a repetition of the same. So let's go to the component switchboard. You might have heard this term before. So the component switchboard. If I go to my components, here you'll see that I have a component called menu items. And going back to what Victor was saying, how to detach everything you can detach, and you'll see why. So here we have that first item of the list, and this is just product items, just repeated. A little bit different that when you're gonna do components for a design system, because on design systems you wouldn't necessarily repeat. That's why you create components. But in this case, it comes in handy. And then below we have the footer component, bill, summary, and the CTA. So let's focus on our first component. The first component has 2 states, so 2 variants. One is the default, where I haven't added anything, and then it has another one where I have added. So if I click the plus or tap the plus, then I should show a plus, the item count, which is 1. So the default item count will be 1, and a minus, and the minus will remove that item. So this is important because once I tap on plus, I'm adding 1 to the bill. So I'm actually doing some sort of mathematical process there where I'm adding 1. It's not only the UI, I'm adding 1 to my bill. So if I tap on plus, it'll add 1, and that should be reflected on my total bill here below with the price, of course. So we'll look at the how I structured this component. This component, as you can see here, it's like pieces by pieces, right? The symbol, the currency symbol is one individual character, and then we have the price, the numeric characters, and then so on, each one. And that will allow me then to pass the variables. And then we can see what's happening on the prototype. So here I'm just saying on tap, change to the added variant. So once I tap the plus, change to that one, and then set some variables, and we'll see how those variables are set now. So that's how I prepare components, the whole interaction within a component. So we're zooming really close to the UI. We're focusing on that one component, and that component holds interactions. So we're not necessarily prototyping the flow itself. We're prototyping the component. This component that can be reused however you want it to. And it will hold dynamic data. So dynamic data in Figma comes through variables. So let's go back and zoom out a little bit to what we want to create. So what we want to create is that when we hit that plus, tap on that plus button, we add 1 and we update the total bill. That's the end goal for now. So remember, we start small, go smaller, so we can also don't get discouraged, because in my case, that's what happened. So variables, if we were going to take the UI and convert it to variables, how would it look on the UI? In the UI, the item, the number would be an item count. So the amount of times that item has been added. Then here we have an item name, and below we have an item price. This price, we know that is set by the restaurant. So that's not something the user will interact with. This number is given. So if we were going to get a database or a CSV file, that number would be there. We wouldn't need to let the user interact or modify that number. Same with the item name. We just need the item count. We need the total bill. So we're going to call this total bill. And then it's just a repetition. Item name, price, item name, price. This is important because then this is how we're going to structure our variables later on. So if we go into Figma, we open our local variables, we see that we have the price. So again, this is a hard value that comes from CSV, comes from the restaurant in this case. Then we have number 4. So instead of item count, for some reason, we'll call it number 4 and starts at 1. That's our default value. And we have the total bill, which starts at 0. We need all of this information in variables so we can then manipulate it. So we can add, subtract, multiply, and so on to calculate the total bill. So variables. Let's go and see how those variables are set up in this file. So this is the variable list. There's a lot of variables there, but we'll focus on what we'll see on the screen. We won't go into detail of the others. So we'll hide that panel, and here we have number 1, 2, 3, up until number 14. This is just the item count. So just to have it here handy, this number 4 is that one. So we see that all of them start with a default value of 1. You could call this item count. You could call it whatever you want. And then below, it starts the item price. So this prices that come from the restaurant, so to speak. And we have the total value, the total bill, which is set as 0. So this is how we set up our variables. And then we need to, of course, assign them to something. If not, they don't do much. So if we look at the UI, we have this 1451, which on the top right corner, you see here, it's referencing a variable, which is this price. So I don't need to type in this number. This number comes from the variable list that we just saw. And then we have the item count, or in this case, the number 4, which is here. So that's how these numbers get populated. If I go into my variables and change the number 4 for 10, it will appear at 10 here. It wouldn't be at 1. So I don't need to be typing in the values. So then, continuing on this one component, we can see how those variables are interacted with. So I'll go back to our prototype settings, and we see that on tab is going to change from default to added. That's our component. When that happens, we want to set the total bill to that price. So in this case, the whitefish price plus the total bill. So what this is doing is that it's targeting this variable, total bill, and updating it with this new price. In this case, if the total bill is 0, it'll update to 1451. But it can be a bill that has 10 items added, so the bill wouldn't be 0. It would be that number plus this price. So when I say total bill, just to recap, because maybe we covered a lot of information, total bill is this number on our footer. So this number, if we go to design here, this number is total bill. So we're updating this number based on the interaction that we just saw. So that's how we set up variables and manipulate the dynamic data at a component level. All of this is, we're zoomed in into this one component. And now we need conditionals to further customize the behavior of what we're doing. So conditionals. So a condition, you can think about a condition of if I do something, then if I do X, I want Y and Z to happen. So in this case, if I add two items in the top, if I add two items, then I need to multiply the item by the price. And then I need to update this amount. So that's a condition. So I'm saying if this action happens, then you should react this way. So let's see how conditionals work. So when I go onto our component here, conditions are this icon we see here. This is a condition. So this is a clear example because it's what we were just seeing. If I want to subtract something, so if something, do something. So in this case, we're saying if the number is greater than 1, you're going to set the number to number 4. So set this number to itself, so to 1, to the default value, minus 1. And if that happens, you're going to set the total bill to total bill minus the price. So you're going to update that price on the footer that we just saw. Otherwise, if that doesn't happen, you're going to change to the default state. So you're going to change from having the minus button and the 1 to our default state here on the right. Because if I take away 1, it should be 0, but we don't have 0 on this prototype. 0 is blank. 0 is not a minus. So that's how we set these conditionals on the case of the minus. And that's how we can toggle between one state and the other depending if we have it included or not. And then we have the opposite, the plus, the adding, which is the same logic. So if number 1 is greater or equal to 1, set number 4, so set 1 to 1 plus 1. So that means that I'm going to have 2. And then you're going to update the total bill to total bill plus the price again. So that's how we set conditionals here. And that's why for some reason, some people call this a component switchboard, because you have all the switching between components, and then you have this test board. So on our test board, we can make sure that all of this that we're talking about actually works. So if I go on the top here, I see that I can add. It's adding, so it's doing all the item count, or number 4 equals to number 4 plus 1, or the inverse logic if I remove minus 1. And if I only have 1 and I take it to 0, it changes to the default state. So that's how we get this to behave in this way. So that's conditionals, and that's how we define dynamic behavior that update or change a value, in this case a variable or content in the UI. So then we have finally the prototype. So in the prototype, if we zoom out to our original use case, we want to pay the bill. After paying the bill, we want to rate the experience, and finally we want to add a tip. So we covered this where we have a lot of the functionality on a component level. Then we just have a rating screen, and then we have another screen where we have to calculate some percentages based on the total bill. So let's see how that works. Now we're going from a component to the prototype of this flow. So here again, we're back to square one. We have all our bills set to 0. There's nothing extraordinary happening. But we know that after whatever configuration happens there, after that, I need to go to the next screen on the flow, which is to rate the experience. And then we'll finalize here on the tip. So we prepare our component to be used in our prototype. In our prototype, quite straightforward. We're going to tap pay my bill. I'm going to go to the rating screen. On the rating screen, I want to save some data because I need it for my tip screen. So I need to set the percentages of the tips. So once I navigate to rating, you're going to set the tip amount of 10% to the total bill, whatever that might be, times 0.1. Here we're taking percentages to decimals. That's the only way we can work with percentages, is just to take them to decimals, so that way we can add it to the total bill, multiply it. So we do the same for the 0.8 for 8%, which is 0.08, and the same for 5%. Then we're gonna set the total split amount, so the total bill amount, to the total bill, so that way I know what I'm gonna pay for. So from 50 euros, I'm gonna update it to 25, which is my consumption, pretty much. So we're gonna go to this screen. In this screen, we could define if we want to, you could imagine if I just give 1 star, obviously I might not want a tip, but you could define that with a condition. So from here, I'll tap continue, and I do want to tip this person. So I'm on the tipping screen. On the tipping screen, we have to set this percentages of the total bill, and that's done with conditionals. So in this case, and we'll just review it really quickly, because here we're doing some Boolean operations. We are trying to identify, what we're trying to do effectively is to identify which percentage is selected. We're not calculating the percentage because the percentage was calculated in the previous screen. We're just carrying the value. And here on this screen, we want to use conditionals, so if-else statements, to know which tip was selected. So if 8% equals true, we set some variables, we update some variables, and we know through the Boolean that's the selected tip amount. And then it just repeats. It's the same logic for 10%, 8%, 5%. Of course, if you add a custom tip, it's not a percentage base, it's just a number. So that's how we would effectively identify what tip is selected through Boolean operations and conditionals. So that's how we ended up with this prototype that allows us to split this total amounts and go into the into calculating the percentages, right? So that's how we manipulate and update data through interactions. So we have the component level where we set all these variables, we set all our parameters, what we identified that is inherited to the component behavior, and then we have a prototype that goes through a flow, and through that flow we're going to update those variables that we set, so we get the outcome we wanted. So for me, this was challenging. I've done at least 2 or 3 full stack development bootcamps and never worked. For me, what worked was to find something that I was really passionate about. For me, it wasn't designing something. In this case, it was just getting this person's feedback about how emotional it was to split a bill or not. That just pissed me off a bit. So I found something that was small, tangible, that I could build. It's fairly simple to build, just based on components. I even started even smaller, just look, hey, if I want to add this and subtract this, how would that work? And then slowly scale it. So I encountered many blockers. Just going from percentage to decimal for me was quite hard. But you just gotta be a little bit relentless and just really want to prove something or build something. So that was for me what made me build that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.